Daniel grew up in a small town where life was simple but often very hard. His parents were kind people, but they struggled every day to keep food on the table. His father worked long hours in a small workshop, fixing old furniture for very little money. His mother cleaned houses for families who were wealthier than them. They loved Daniel very much, but most of their time was spent working to survive. Because of this, they needed someone to look after him while they worked. That someone was Clara, a gentle woman who became more than just a nanny. She became part of Daniel's life and heart. Clara was not rich. She wore simple clothes, spoke softly, and carried herself with quiet dignity. She had no family of her own, so when she took the job of caring for Daniel, she gave him all her love and attention as if he were her own child. She cooked meals for him, told him bedtime stories, and sang songs to help him sleep. When he was sick, she would sit by his bed all night, wiping his forehead and whispering comforting words. To Daniel, Clara was not just a helper in the house, she was his second mother. One memory always stayed with Daniel. When he was 7 years old, he fell very sick with a high fever. His parents were too worried and exhausted to think straight. Clara carried him in her arms to the small clinic in their town. Walking in the rain without an umbrella, she held him close, shielding him from the cold, and prayed softly until they arrived. The doctor later told them that if Clara hadn't rushed him there in time, his condition could have become dangerous. From that day on, Daniel never forgot how much she cared for him. As the years passed, Clara became the steady figure in Daniel's life. His parents did their best, but it was Clara who made sure he ate his meals, wore clean clothes, and studied his lessons. She encouraged him to dream bigger than his surroundings. When Daniel doubted himself, she told him, "You are not poor in spirit, my boy. You have strength in your heart. One day you will rise, and I will watch you shine." These words stayed with him through every struggle. When Daniel grew older, his parents could no longer afford Clara's services. With heavy hearts, they let her go, but Clara always visited when she could. Even after she left the household, she kept track of Daniel's growth. She came to see him on his birthdays, often bringing him small gifts that she could barely afford: a knitted scarf, a notebook for his studies, or homemade sweets wrapped carefully in cloth. To outsiders, these gifts seemed small, but to Daniel, they were treasures, reminders of her love. Daniel worked hard in school, motivated by the encouragement Clara had given him. He earned a scholarship to study in a good university. Life wasn't easy, but he never gave up. He remembered Clara's words whenever he felt like quitting. Slowly, through discipline and determination, Daniel built a career. He started with small jobs, saved every penny, and eventually entered the world of business. His sharp mind and honest ways won him respect. Over the years, Daniel's ventures grew, and soon he became a millionaire. He owned properties, companies, and lived in a grand mansion. Yet in his heart, he always remembered the woman who had carried him through the storms of childhood. Now married to Sophia, Daniel was living the kind of life he once only saw in dreams. Sophia was elegant, well-dressed, and loved being part of high society. She enjoyed parties, fancy dinners, and expensive trips. She was proud to be the wife of a successful man. But unlike Daniel, she did not understand the value of humble beginnings. While Daniel's heart was full of gratitude toward people like Clara, Sophia often looked down on those who did not match her status. One sunny afternoon, Daniel received a message that touched him deeply. Clara had decided to visit him after many years. She was older now, her hair gray, her steps slower, but her heart was still filled with warmth for the boy she had once cared for. Daniel was overjoyed. He immediately prepared for her arrival, instructing his staff to welcome her with respect. To him, this was not just a visit. It was a reunion with someone who shaped his life. When Clara arrived at the mansion, she stood quietly at the large gates, holding a small cloth bag in her hands. She wore her usual modest dress, neatly ironed but old. Her shoes were worn out from years of use. Still, her eyes sparkled with affection when she saw Daniel waiting for her at the entrance. He rushed to her, hugged her tightly, and for a moment he was no longer a millionaire. He was simply the boy who had once been carried in her arms. Sophia, standing nearby, watched this scene with a frown. She could not understand why her wealthy husband would show such affection to a woman dressed so simply. To her, Clara looked like someone who didn't belong in their grand home. As Daniel guided Clara inside, Sophia whispered to herself, already judging her husband's old nanny. She planned to keep her distance, but her discomfort was clear in her eyes. Daniel, however, paid no attention to Sophia's reaction. He sat with Clara in the living room, offering her tea and snacks. He listened as she spoke about her life, her health, and how she still remembered all the little moments from his childhood. Daniel's heart softened with every word. He realized how much he owed to this woman who had asked for nothing but had given everything. That evening, Daniel introduced Clara to the rest of the family. His relatives greeted her kindly, but Sophia barely acknowledged her. She offered a polite smile that quickly faded, and her eyes shifted to the guests as if embarrassed by Clara's presence. Daniel noticed this, but he stayed calm. He knew Sophia's attitude would soon reveal itself in ways that would test his patience. For Clara, being in Daniel's mansion was overwhelming. She admired the tall ceilings, shining chandeliers, and wide hallways, but her eyes always returned to Daniel. She didn't care about the wealth. She only cared that the boy she once cradled was now strong, successful, and respected. She felt proud, and her heart was filled with gratitude for the chance to see him again. What Clara did not know was that her visit would soon turn into an unexpected test. While she came with love and humility, another person in the house saw her as nothing more than a shadow from the past. That tension, hidden beneath the surface, was about to change the family's evening in a way no one could have predicted. The grand mansion was alive with activity as the family gathering began. Daniel had planned it weeks earlier, inviting his relatives and close friends for a dinner that was meant to be warm and joyful. The large dining hall sparkled with golden lights, long tables lined with shining cutlery, and staff moving quickly to make sure everything looked perfect. Guests began to arrive one by one, dressed in elegant clothes, exchanging greetings and smiles. Laughter echoed in the hallways as people caught up after months of not seeing each other. Clara, however, felt out of place in such a grand setting. She sat quietly on a chair near the corner, her hands folded in her lap, her modest dress making her look like she didn't belong in the sea of glittering gowns and suits. Yet her eyes shone with happiness because she was close to Daniel. She wasn't there for luxury or food. She was there because the boy she once raised had remembered her and welcomed her with open arms. That alone filled her heart. Sophia entered the room like a queen. Her dress shimmered with silver, her jewelry sparkled under the chandelier, and her smile was wide, though not warm. She loved attention and knew how to command it. Guests complimented her beauty and style, and she accepted their words with graceful nods. But as her eyes moved across the room, they fell on Clara, sitting quietly in the corner. Immediately her smile faded. She leaned closer to a cousin standing nearby and whispered, "Who invited her here?" The cousin, surprised, explained, "That's Daniel's old nanny. She practically raised him." Sophia's lips tightened. "Raised him?" she repeated with a hint of mockery. "She looks like she belongs in the kitchen. Not in this gathering." The cousin looked away, uncomfortable, sensing the sharpness in Sophia's tone. As the evening went on, Daniel made sure to greet every guest warmly. But he never forgot Clara sitting quietly, and he often walked over to her, asking if she was comfortable or if she needed anything. He introduced her to a few relatives, proudly saying, "This is Mrs. Clara. She looked after me when I was little. I wouldn't be the man I am today without her." Some relatives nodded politely, offering small smiles to Clara, but most didn't know what to say. They could see the respect in Daniel's voice, yet they also felt Sophia's coldness toward the woman. When dinner was served, everyone took their seats around the long table. Daniel made sure Clara was seated close enough so she wouldn't feel ignored, but Sophia didn't like it. She whispered to the maid arranging dishes. She should be sitting at the far end. The maid hesitated, not sure how to respond, and finally left things as Daniel had arranged them. The conversation at the table was lively. People talked about business, travel, and luxury. Sophia was in her element, boasting about the new car Daniel had bought her, the expensive dress she had ordered from abroad, and the vacations they were planning. Guests admired her stories, though some nodded only out of politeness. Clara listened silently, smiling occasionally but saying very little. She was not used to such conversations, and she didn't want to disturb anyone. Sophia, however, grew increasingly annoyed. Every time Daniel glanced toward Clara with affection or asked if she was enjoying the meal, Sophia's heart burned with quiet anger. She saw it as competition for his attention, though Clara had no such intention. For Clara, being at the table was already more than she ever expected. She was grateful and humble, At one point, Sophia leaned toward her group of friends and whispered just loud enough, "Can you believe Daniel brought her here dressed like that? It's embarrassing. A millionaire's home should not host people like her." Her friends shifted uncomfortably, some glancing toward Clara with pity, others trying to change the subject. But Clara heard the words. Her ears burned, her heart sank, and she lowered her eyes to her plate, pretending she hadn't noticed. Daniel noticed everything. He saw the way Sophia whispered, the way Clara's expression dimmed, the way the atmosphere turned awkward. He remained calm, keeping his emotions hidden, but deep inside he was unsettled. He thought to himself, "Why can't Sophia see what Clara means to me? Why does she judge so quickly without knowing her heart?" The evening went on, and Daniel tried to lighten the mood by sharing stories from his childhood. He told everyone how Clara used to walk him to school, how she would save her share of food to feed him when there wasn't enough, and how she stayed awake nights when he was sick. "She was like a guardian angel," Daniel said with a smile, looking at Clara warmly. Some relatives clapped gently, appreciating the story. Clara's eyes filled with tears, touched by his words. But Sophia rolled her eyes discreetly, annoyed that her husband was praising the woman she looked down upon. After dinner, guests moved into the lounge for tea and desserts. Daniel asked Clara to join them, but she declined politely, choosing instead to remain quietly near the edge of the room. She didn't want to draw attention. That's when Sophia walked past her and muttered under her breath, "You don't belong here. People are being polite, but everyone can see you're out of place." Clara lowered her head, choosing not to reply. She had lived a life of humility, and insults didn't surprise her anymore. Still, the words pierced her heart. Some of the guests noticed Sophia's behavior. They whispered among themselves, questioning why the wife of such a successful man would act so rudely. They admired Daniel's success, but began to wonder about the sharp contrast between his kindness and his wife's arrogance. Daniel returned to Clara's side and asked if she was all right. Clara smiled softly and said, "I am fine, my boy. Don't worry about me." But Daniel could see the sadness in her eyes. He felt anger rising in his chest, but he held it back. He knew this wasn't the right moment to speak. He had always been a man of patience, and he was waiting for the right time to show everyone, especially Sophia, how important Clara truly was in his life. By the end of the evening, the gathering had been successful on the surface. Guests left with polite smiles, thanking Daniel and Sophia for their hospitality. But under that surface, tension had quietly grown. Clara went to her room, her heart heavy but her spirit calm, while Sophia retired to her suite, still upset by what she saw as an unnecessary connection to Daniel's past. Daniel stayed awake long into the night. He sat in his study, staring at the shelves filled with awards, books, and symbols of his wealth. Yet his mind was not on his riches. It was on Clara. He remembered her sacrifices, her love, her guidance. He also remembered the way Sophia had humiliated her in whispers and cold stares. For Daniel, this was more than just rudeness. It was an insult to the woman who had given him a second chance at life. He knew something had to be done. The family had seen Sophia's behavior. Clara had felt the sting of humiliation. And Daniel, though patient, was not a man who forgot such things. He had already decided in his heart that the next time Clara was treated with disrespect, he would not remain silent. His next move, he knew, would not only surprise Sophia but also shock the entire famille. The following morning, the mansion was quiet after the previous night's gathering. The staff cleaned the hall, arranging chairs back in place and clearing away the last traces of the party. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, making the floor shine. But behind that beautiful scene, something heavy still lingered. Clara was up early, sitting in the garden with a cup of tea. She enjoyed the fresh air, watching the flowers sway in the soft breeze. To anyone passing by, she looked calm, but inside her heart, she carried the sting of Sophia's words from the night before. She told herself not to dwell on it. "I came here only to see Daniel," she whispered. "He remembers me. That's enough." Clara was a woman who had faced much in life, and humility was her shield. Still, it hurt when Sophia had whispered those cold words. "You don't belong here." She wondered quietly if perhaps she had made a mistake coming to such a grand place. Daniel, on the other hand, had hardly slept. He had replayed every moment from the dinner in his mind. He remembered Clara's soft smile hiding sadness, the way Sophia rolled her eyes when he spoke of Clara. and the way guests had exchanged awkward glances when Sophia whispered too loudly. He could no longer ignore it. His respect for Clara was too deep. For years he had built his fortune with her encouragement echoing in his heart. To see her treated poorly was something he could not tolerate any longer. Later that afternoon, the family gathered in the lounge for tea. Clara sat quietly, not wanting to take up space, while Sophia moved around, serving herself first and making small talk with cousins. At one point, Clara stood to help a young maid carry a heavy tray. Her hands trembled slightly, but she lifted one of the teapots with care. Before she could set it down, the pot slipped slightly, and a few drops of tea spilled onto the polished table. The room went silent for a moment. Then Sophia's voice rang out sharply, breaking the calm. "Oh, really? Can you not even hold a simple teapot properly?" Everyone turned their heads toward the sound. Clara froze, her face turning pale. She quickly wiped the drops with a napkin and whispered, "I'm so sorry." But Sophia didn't stop. She raised her voice so the entire room could hear. "Daniel, look at this. Your nanny is clumsy and careless. She shouldn't even be touching things in this house. We have staff for that." Her words cut through the air like knives. Clara lowered her eyes, her cheeks burning with shame. The relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked down at their plates, avoiding Clara's gaze, while others glanced at Daniel, waiting for his reaction. Children in the room stopped playing and stared in confusion, sensing something serious. Daniel's fists clenched under the table. His mind raced back to his childhood, to the nights when Clara had carried him to the clinic in the rain, to the mornings when she gave up her own breakfast so he could eat. He remembered the way she held him when he cried, how she encouraged him to study, and how she told him to never give up on his dreams. In those moments, she had been his strength. And now, in front of everyone, she was being humiliated by the very woman who claimed to love him. He looked at Clara, who sat down slowly, whispering another apology, even though she had done nothing wrong. He saw tears form in her eyes, but she quickly brushed them away, trying not to show weakness. Daniel's heart ached. He could not stay silent any longer, but instead of reacting immediately, he took a deep breath and controlled his anger. He knew that if he exploded right then, it might only cause more embarrassment for Clara. He wanted his words to be remembered, not lost in a storm of shouting, so he waited, silently sipping his tea, letting the room grow tense. Everyone knew Daniel well enough to realize that his silence meant something was coming. Sophia, however, mistook his silence for agreement. She smirked slightly, feeling as though she had proved her point. She leaned back in her chair and added, "Honestly, Daniel, this is not the image we should be showing people. We live in a mansion. We entertain important guests. And here we are, bringing someone from the past who doesn't even know how to behave in such settings. It's embarrassing for you and for me." The audacity of those words struck the family like thunder. A cousin gasped softly, and Daniel's mother-in-law coughed uncomfortably, trying to change the subject. But Daniel raised his hand gently, signaling for silence. The room fell quiet. All eyes turned to him. He set down his teacup carefully, his movements calm but firm. His face was steady, but his eyes burned with intensity. He stood slowly and walked across the room toward Clara. Everyone watched in silence. He reached her side, placed his hand gently on her shoulder, and looked around at the family. "Do you know who this woman is?" he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is not just my nanny. This is the woman who raised me when my parents could not. When I was sick, it was she who carried me to the clinic through the rain. When we had no food, she gave me her own share. When I was afraid, she comforted me, and when I wanted to give up, she told me to keep going. Without her, I would not be standing here today." A wave of silence swept through the room. Some relatives lowered their heads ashamed. Others nodded slowly, realizing the truth of his words. Clara looked at Daniel with wide eyes, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Daniel then turned his gaze toward Sophia. His voice grew firmer. "Respect is not about wealth or clothes or grand houses. Respect is about honoring those who gave us love when we had nothing. And if anyone in this house thinks they are above her, then they have misunderstood the meaning of family." The room was frozen. No one dared to speak. Sophia's face turned pale. She tried to force a smile, but it faltered. She had never seen Daniel speak with such weight and certainty. His words carried not just authority, but also truth that no one could deny. Clara whispered softly. Daniel, please don't trouble yourself for me. I'm fine. But Daniel shook his head gently. No, Clara, you deserve more than silence. You deserve honor. Everyone present felt the depth of Daniel's gratitude and the strength of his loyalty. It was no longer just a family tea gathering. It had turned into a moment of truth where values were laid bare. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Sophia sat frozen, her pride bruised. She realized too late that her attempt to belittle Clara had only revealed her own arrogance. The family watched her, their eyes filled with judgment while their hearts quietly admired Daniel. Daniel knew this was only the beginning. He had defended Clara, but he also had plans. Plans that would not only restore Clara's dignity but also show Sophia, and the whole family, that no insult against the woman who raised him would ever be left unanswered. His next move would be bigger, louder, and unforgettable. The air in the lounge was still heavy from Daniel's words. No one moved, no one dared to speak. Clara sat quietly with her hands folded on her lap, her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. Sophia looked away, her face pale with embarrassment, her pride wounded. Daniel stood tall, his calm voice still echoing in the minds of everyone present. He had defended Clara with such strength that the entire family now saw her differently. But Daniel wasn't done. He knew words alone weren't enough. He wanted to make it clear that Clara was not just a guest for a single evening. She was part of his life, and she deserved a permanent place of honor. The family needed to see it. Sophia needed to see it, and Clara needed to feel it. Daniel turned to the staff and said, "Please prepare the dining hall again. I have something to announce and I want the entire family present." His tone was steady, not harsh, but full of authority. The staff hurried to set things up, and soon everyone was seated again around the grand dining table. Clara tried to excuse herself, whispering, "Daniel, please don't trouble yourself for me. I am not used to this." But Daniel gently held her hand and guided her to a seat at the center of the table. Once everyone settled, Daniel stood at the head of the table. His voice carried a weight that silenced the room. "Family," he began. "You all know me as the man who built businesses, who owns properties, who wears fine suits and lives in this mansion. But tonight I want you to remember that I was once a little boy in a small house with no food, no fine clothes, and no certainty of tomorrow. And in those days when my parents were working day and night, this woman," he gestured to Clara, "was the one who raised me. She is not just my nanny. She is my second mother." Gasps filled the room. Some relatives nodded slowly, realizing why Daniel spoke with such passion earlier. Clara lowered her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. She tried to protest softly. "Daniel, my boy, please, you don't need to say all this." But Daniel continued firmly, "Yes, I do, because respect is not given silently. It must be shown." He paused for a moment, then looked around the room. "From this day forward, Clara will not be treated as a guest who comes and goes. This is her home. She will live here with us, not as a servant, but as an honored member of this family. She will have her own suite, her own comfort, and every care she deserves." The room went silent again. Some relatives' eyes widened in surprise. Others whispered softly to each other. Sophia sat frozen, her lips pressed tightly together. She had expected Daniel to defend Clara, but she had never imagined he would go this far. Daniel wasn't finished. He looked directly at Sophia now. His voice was calm but strong. "Sophia, I brought Clara here because she is part of who I am. She is part of my history, my story, my success. When you humiliate her, you humiliate me. This house, this wealth, these parties, they mean nothing if we forget the people who helped us become who we are. I will not stand by while anyone, not even my wife, disrespects her." The words landed like thunder. The relatives stared, some with admiration, others with discomfort. Sophia's cheeks flushed and she tried to respond, but the weight of Daniel's truth kept her silent. She realized this was not just a private matter. It was now a lesson for the entire family. Daniel then walked over to Clara and gently held her hand. "Clara," he said softly but loud enough for all to hear, "you once carried me in your arms when I was weak. Now it is my turn to carry you in every way I can. This house is yours. Whatever comfort you need, you will have it." Clara shook her head, her voice trembling. "Daniel, I don't need anything. Just seeing you succeed, seeing you healthy and strong is enough for me." But Daniel smiled. "That may be enough for you, but it is not enough for me. Gratitude must be shown, not just felt. You gave me love without asking for anything in return. Now it is my turn to give without limits. As if to seal his words, Daniel called his lawyer, who was present among the guests, and asked him to read out a document he had prepared earlier. The lawyer stood and opened the folder, announcing that Daniel had created a trust fund in Clara's name. It would provide her with financial security, health care, and every need for the rest of her life. The family gasped again, this time louder. Some clapped softly, impressed by Daniel's generosity. Others whispered to each other, moved by the depth of his gratitude. Clara covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed by emotion. "My boy," she whispered through tears, "you've given me too much." Daniel placed his hand gently on her shoulder and replied, "No, Clara, this is still less compared to what you gave me." Sophia's pride crumbled further. She sat in silence, realizing that her arrogance had backfired. What she thought would make Clara look small had only made Clara shine brighter, and Daniel's love for her stronger. Guests who once admired Sophia's wealth now admired Daniel's heart. They whispered to each other about the greatness of gratitude, about how true success was not in gold or diamonds, but in remembering those who stood by you when you had nothing. The evening took on a new meaning. What began as an ordinary family gathering had turned into a lesson about humility and respect. Clara, who entered the mansion with hesitation, now sat in the center of honor, with the entire family looking at her differently. She was no longer the maid from the past. She was the woman who shaped Daniel's life, and Daniel had made sure everyone knew it. As the night grew late, Clara excused herself, still overwhelmed, and went to rest in the new suite Daniel had arranged for her. It was beautifully decorated with soft lighting, a comfortable bed, and a view of the garden she loved so much. She stood by the window for a long time, tears in her eyes, whispering prayers of gratitude for Daniel. Meanwhile, the family slowly dispersed, but the atmosphere was different. Relatives spoke softly about Daniel's words. Some said they had learned something important that night, that wealth meant nothing without gratitude. Others admired his courage to speak openly, even to his wife, to defend what was right. Sophia remained in the lounge long after everyone left. She sat alone, replaying the evening in her mind. For the first time, she felt the sting of being judged by others. The eyes of the family, once full of admiration for her beauty and wealth, now carried disappointment. She realized that Daniel had shown her, and everyone else, that true respect could not be demanded by arrogance, but earned through love and kindness. Daniel walked into the lounge quietly and looked at Sophia. He didn't speak harshly, but his words were firm. "Sophia, I hope you understand now. Wealth fades, beauty fades, but respect and gratitude last forever. If you want to walk this journey with me, you must learn this truth. Otherwise, this mansion will never feel like a home." Sophia lowered her eyes. For once, she had no reply. The lesson was clear, and it had shaken her deeply. That night, the mansion was quiet, but the echoes of Daniel's words lingered in every corner. His next move had not only shocked Sophia, but it also changed the way the entire family saw Clara. More than that, it had reminded everyone what it truly meant to honor the people who made us who we are. The next morning, the mansion felt different. The staff moved about their duties quietly, yet there was a calmness in the air, as if something had changed overnight. Clara woke up early in her new suite. The room was bright and warm, decorated simply but beautifully. She stood near the window, gazing at the garden, the flowers glowing in the sunlight. She still could not believe that Daniel had done so much for her. To her, she had only done her duty years ago, loving and caring for a little boy whose parents worked hard. But to Daniel, she had given him her entire heart, and now he had returned that love in a way she never imagined. Daniel, too, woke up early. He went to the gym, as was his habit, but his mind was not on exercise. He kept thinking about the night before. He had defended Clara publicly, set her place in his home, and made sure she would never feel small again. Yet he knew his work was not finished. He wanted his family, not just Sophia, to truly learn from this. Gratitude was not just a private feeling. It was a value that needed to be taught and remembered. At breakfast, the family gathered again. Clara joined them, still shy, but Daniel insisted she sit next to him. He poured tea for her himself, ignoring the surprised looks from some of the relatives. "This seat," he said with a smile, "is where she belongs." Clara lowered her head, whispering softly, "Daniel, you don't need to do all this." But Daniel only replied, "I want to." "You deserve it." Sophia sat across the table, silent. The pride she once carried like a crown felt heavy now. She remembered how she had mocked Clara the day before, how she had whispered words meant to hurt. And now the same woman she tried to humiliate sat in honor beside her husband. The guests who once praised Sophia's beauty now looked at her with quiet judgment. Her cheeks burned, but she remained quiet, realizing her mistake. After breakfast, Daniel called for everyone to gather in the living room. He wanted to speak to them once more. The relatives settled into their seats, waiting. Clara tried to excuse herself again, but Daniel gently held her arm and guided her to the center. "No," he said softly. "You stay. You must hear this too." Standing tall, Daniel addressed the family. "Last night I spoke about gratitude. Today I want to show you something more. Success in life is not measured by wealth, by clothes, or by the size of your house. Success is measured by how much love and respect you give to the people who stood by you when you were weak." He paused, looking around at each face. "Clara gave me everything she had when I had nothing. I will spend the rest of my life honoring her for that. And I want you all to remember, never let pride blind you to the value of people." The relatives nodded slowly. Some had tears in their eyes, touched by his words. Daniel then turned to Sophia, his gaze steady. "Sophia," he said, "I know you love me. But love is not only about standing beside me when I'm successful. Love also means respecting the roots of where I came from. If you cannot respect Clara, then you do not respect me. I hope you understand this now." Sophia looked down, ashamed. For the first time, she felt truly small, not because anyone humiliated her, but because she realized she had humiliated herself. She stood slowly, walked toward Clara, and said in a trembling voice, I was wrong. Please forgive me. I didn't understand." Clara, with her gentle nature, reached out and held Sophia's hands. "Child," she said softly, "I hold no anger in my heart. We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." Those words softened the tension in the room. Sophia felt tears well up in her eyes, and for once she let them fall. She realized that the true strength in the house was not in her jewels or dresses, but in Clara's humble kindness and Daniel's loyalty. To seal the moment, Daniel made one final announcement. He had arranged a small ceremony that evening, where he would officially introduce Clara not as his nanny but as his second mother. The entire family, staff, and even a few close friends were invited. "This is not just about me," Daniel said. "This is about teaching the next generation what gratitude truly means." That evening, the ceremony was held in the mansion's garden. Soft lights decorated the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, and everyone gathered in anticipation. Clara sat in the front wearing a new dress Daniel had given her, a simple, elegant gown that made her look graceful. She felt shy, but Daniel's reassuring smile gave her courage. When the time came, Daniel walked to the front and addressed everyone. He told stories from his childhood, how Clara had carried him to the clinic in the rain, how she had given up her food, how she had stitched his torn clothes when they couldn't afford new ones. He spoke not with shame but with pride. "This woman saved me," he declared. "And today I want the world to know that I am proud to call her my second mother." The crowd erupted in applause. Some relatives stood, clapping with tears in their eyes. The staff, who had always respected Clara quietly, now clapped openly, relieved that she was finally receiving the honor she deserved. Even Sophia, standing in the corner, clapped with sincerity. She knew now that she had much to learn. Daniel then surprised everyone by placing a small necklace around Clara's neck. It wasn't the most expensive jewel in the house, but it was designed with a simple charm, a symbol of love and eternity. "This," he said, "is a reminder that my gratitude for you will never end." Clara cried openly now, unable to contain her emotions. She hugged Daniel tightly, whispering blessings into his ear, the same way she used to when he was a child. From that day on, Clara's life changed. She no longer lived in the shadows of the past. She walked through the mansion with respect, greeted warmly by relatives and staff alike. She had her own space, her own comfort, and most importantly, the recognition she never asked for but had always deserved. Sophia, too, changed. The incident humbled her. She became more careful with her words, more respectful to those around her, and more aware of the value of kindness. She realized that her beauty and wealth could win admiration, but only respect, love, and humility could win true honor. Slowly, she built a bond with Clara, learning from her patience and wisdom. The family often spoke of that evening, calling it the night of gratitude. It became a lesson passed down to the younger ones. They learned that no matter how far one rises in life, one must never forget the hands that held them in their weakest days. Daniel felt a deep sense of peace. He had defended Clara, honored her, and ensured that her place in his life was recognized forever. His next move had indeed shocked the whole family, but more importantly, it had opened their eyes. They would never look at Clara the same way again. As for Clara, she lived the rest of her days in peace and dignity, surrounded by love. Each evening she sat in the garden, watching the flowers sway in the breeze, whispering prayers for Daniel. To her, he was still the little boy she had once carried through the rain. To him, she was the silent angel who had shaped his destiny. And in that mansion where wealth sparkled in every corner, the greatest treasure was not gold, jewels, or fine clothes. The greatest treasure was gratitude, shining brighter than anything else.